I wanted to link one to that, however. Several months ago, either in New York Times or in Time Magazine, it was suggested that what we really need to do is change our hiring practices. And that many European countries don't have quite our problems because the requirements to be a policeman are more elevated than ours are. And I understand the current situation, but I think we have to start someplace, and we ought to start nationwide with considering more than just a high school education. What are other requirements other than a minimum educational level for hiring police? I mean, what level do they have to reach?
Well, obviously you have a physical exam, you have a mental exam, you have background check. Ironically, of course, today marijuana is legal, and that's the most popular drug among younger people, and now younger, older people, and everybody, you know. But that excluded a lot of people over the years, basically, before. And now it's, as you might guess, you can't do marijuana now because it's federally illegal. So even today, even in Washington State, I want to be a cop. I was talking to my youngest son the other day. I've got 4 kids, and he happens to be African American, and I said, well, why don't you look into policing? He said, you know, gee, Dad, I don't know. And he likes to, he's 26. He likes to use marijuana. I'm not. I'm just a different generation. I'm a drinker. But you know, he wouldn't make it because it's federal law that prohibits marijuana. It trumps, no pun intended, it trumps state law. So you can't be a marijuana user, and you know, the standards have changed more recently, more times, but you aren't supposed to, right, to get a job as a police officer.
Well, I just want to follow up, and then I'll shut up. Is there something that we could do in that list of requirements that we aren't doing now?
I'm sorry?
In other words, in the list of requirements, are there requirements we could add or elevate apart from?
Well, of course, I'm an educator, and I think education, we know from research that educated officers, i.e. AA, bachelor, perform better as a rule. That doesn't mean, you know, there aren't exceptions, but they perform better in terms of ethics, in terms of job performance, etc. Right? So, but when you have a problem like we have of getting persons just with high school, you know, as an option, it's kind of hard to put that standard unless we raise salaries, benefits, that kind of thing. That would be one thing. Obviously, I'm hoping, and again, I don't use marijuana, but we got to change this stupid federal law where marijuana is classified with heroin and stuff. I mean, that was part of the war on drugs, 1970s, Mr. Richard Nixon, yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to follow up on what Beverly was saying and kind of what you were saying in regard to not having enough officers going into the positions, and then almost it's an unpleasant enough job where it would only attract certain people that either are really dedicated to serving our communities or want control and power over other people. And so if we had if we made the position more beneficial to work-life balance and then also supported them with mental health so they weren't having to deal with the mental health crises alone, then perhaps we could be helping everyone out.
Sure, and I believe now that a few jurisdictions are doing that, are pairing. And that relates to a larger issue. We don't really have decent health care, and we don't really deal with successfully and adequately mental health issues. And I'm old enough to remember in the 1990s we started closing down mental health institutions, releasing people, and so what happened? Who gets them? Police, streets, you know, homeless, etc. Creating a problem. This doesn't necessarily happen. I lived 20 years in Canada, which has a great health system and social services system. they still have the problem, but not to the extent that we do. I lived in Australia too, other nation states which have better health care and better social services, if you will.
A lot of times when we're discussing race and policing, people they'll say things like, well, what about black on black crime, or there's more crime among minorities, so what does the data show on that?
Well, that happens. I'm a student of homicide. I compared homicide in Seattle, Washington, and Vancouver, British Columbia, when Chief Kurlikowski was kind enough to give me access, and I interviewed homicide detectives in both cities. And if you look at homicides in Seattle, they're disproportionately black on black, okay, and they're high rate. And that's across the country. That doesn't negate police reform or anything. That's just a reality. And we know that homicides, and this is across countries, tend to disproportionately occur among poor people, people who are struggling in crisis economically. And that tends to be, whether it's Canada here or elsewhere, people of color who are at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, if you will, England, wherever. So it isn't race per se, it's economic condition that is involved. But that begs the question, right? Historically, we have put African Americans and Native Americans at the bottom, right? I remember, and I think I told you, I was very happy not to have been raised in the South during Jim Crow. In the 60s, I played college football. We played in Georgia and Texas. We had black players, Linfield College and Oregon, small college. We played for the champions, national champions. But when we went down there, we couldn't stay at certain places. And when we played for the national championship in Augusta, Georgia, we had the keys to the city, right, supposedly. But then they crossed off, what's the golf, Masters, that golf place. I'm not a golf player. They crossed it off because no whites, of course.
That was what year?
No black, excuse me. Yeah, that was the way the South was, and it was throughout. And of course, we up here were saying, yeah, glad we're free. I grew up in a working class neighborhood, and first it was in West Bremerton projects, white projects. Blacks weren't allowed. And I always wonder, one of my friends at school is not in the neighborhood. That's because of housing policies in the Northwest and the North. As you know, recently a number of affluent Seattleites found out, gee, there's this thing that says blacks and Jews and others can't have this house. Of course, it's illegal now. But that was up through the 60s, that there were those kinds of specifics in terms of selling and buying houses.
Liz would like to know what year it was that you went down to Augusta?
I'm sorry?
What year?
Oh, it was 1965.
Oh,
Linfield College, we played St. John's. Anyway, that's yeah, glory days.